So my dissertation is informed by dance, and I'm a dance educator, so I wanted to bring dance and embodiment, movements into my dissertation, so my participants who are former dance students can also express themselves through dance, through movements, and that is their primary language. That way, it made sense to include the modality of embodiment and images next to text and verbal expression in my research. My name is Dagmar Spain. I am a dance educator, scholar, writer, movement practitioner, and interested in dialogic spaces. So my dissertation is about actually the dialogic space, which was actually not so clear from the beginning, because I thought it was about dance students, reflections on their dance education. I had, of course, multi-modalities is very important in my research and dissertation, and also that co-participation. And I realized, but it's actually all of these things. And in this dialogic space, which I consider that space that all my research is sitting in, is placed and is truly that space where all these parts are communicating with each other and coming to light through communicating with each other. So it is an attempt to bring in dialogue throughout my methodology, throughout my way I participate with my research participants, and I consider myself a participant and them as researcher. And this collaboration and using all these multimodalities, which also dialogue with each other, really became my research. And finally I got to this phenomena, which is the dialogic space. And it's really just a space and openness that dialogue can happen on that level with all these components. And what I discovered with this in my research was that it wasn't easy to really like almost grasp what is that dialogic space, what is that, what does that mean, and in which way I can actually, first of all, steep my research in, and also then eventually show it to a reader or an audience. And it became something very elusive in the beginning. And then I realized with all these components, step by step, it became to light. So it was really, I can say, a journey, a process. It wasn't something I knew exactly what I got myself into. And it became to that what my dissertation then is about. And the final version of it, I could say I discovered that research and a dissertation is a process. It's a process where you go along and find yourself in this process, and staying true what I wanted to really show, that it's not just a way of reporting research, it's a way of bringing all these modalities into my reporting that then create a different picture or perspective on my research. Wegerev, which is one of the authors that I cited, and I really used a lot of his thoughts and citations. He's a professor of education at Cambridge, and he is really steeped in dialogic pedagogy, and he explained, described the dialogic space as a space of openness, and multiple perspectives can kind of be encompassed in that space. So it's a possibility where I think as a researcher, we can sometimes maybe get a little tunnel vision at times to say, you know, I want this and I just want to get through that and this is my research. And I think it's a possibility for me, especially as doing a dissertation, doing this large research, to always stay open for new perspectives that come in. And in this case, for example, my participants, you know, I asked them along the way, you know, how they see themselves as researchers, or questions that would just come up through the interviews, through our many dances, which we'll talk, I guess, a little bit more about soon. And so it's that ability to stay open and to say, okay, maybe there's a new perspective I have to incorporate rather than already knowing. So this is it's a very flexible methodology, if you know, since I called it dialogic spaces or embodied dialogic spaces as research methodology. And in this case, it's probably a certain state of mind and body that I try to be open to throughout my research and my dissertation. So if we consider dialogic space a space that's filled with dialogue, which means you are in a dialogue finding maybe a new perspective because you dialogue with another person, I just put the embodied component into that I said, but when we are, you know, a body with a body and we may not use verbal expression, does that mean we're not in a dialogue? You know, I think throughout my dance, you know, career, I felt very often that a dialogue through my body with another dancer in maybe a certain piece or just in an improvisation, I felt like I could say more, or I felt I was understood sometimes even more. And I just allowed my body to speak and listen to the body of another person. So all I can say, and this is also what Wegener said, that like this dialogic space can be found in improvisation, can be found in jazz. Jazz music is very dialogic, and can be found in spaces where bodies non-verbally communicate. So it could be through music as well, of course. It could be also through art, maybe two painters communicate with, you know, their brush strokes or something, you know. So just getting away from our traditional understanding of dialogue that it is a verbal activity. The form that it finally took was the form that in that process I needed kind of to follow. And in this process it was clearly that if I want to have this dialogic space, I need to incorporate, since dissertations are usually written, so I have to use the textual form, but I also used many images, and I also used the videos. And even with the music tracks for some of the videos was part of this survey that I started my research, kind of like kick-started my research. It was the surveys with alternative assessment tools, which the participant really reflected in non-textual way on their dance education. So I gave them, for example, an image, or I gave them choices of images and said, okay, if you look at these images, how would you, which image would become the closest to how you experience your dance education? Or I gave them a music piece to say, so if you listen to these 6 choices of music pieces, which would be the closest to your experience in your dance education? So those were the ways that I tried to bring these other perspectives in, that their experience is multi-layered. And I wanted to show that in a dissertation you can have these multiple layers where participants can express then how they experience, for example, in this case, their dance education. It could be any subject. So I was interested that I bring in as many perspectives or as many layers, so that maybe the experience can be more inclusive and more in depth. You know, I give more credence to their experience than rather than just asking a question, you know. In the end, I was always very surprised that they felt very comfortable. So it goes back to that we are multi-layered. We have all our senses available to us. I think it's just a matter of how, you know, different instruments, in this case a survey, can really tap into those sensory responses. So I would say many people would just respond quite easily to them, at least the ones, that I had, given these surveys to. This I think is that process again, because that was in my last data analysis class, which I worked with Dr. Marsick, which I'm very grateful to. She's really, I think in this process, really holding my hand in that way that she knew that I was like very clear about my research, but also because of these many different data that I collected, how do you now report really your research, and how do you make sense of it in that way? So I chose that phenomenological theming in my coding, and that helped me a lot because I have always being in this dialogue with my participants in responding to their dances, which are called the somatic dance narratives. And then I would, in the response, would find actually that theming, because it was clear what they did, and in my response it was clear that themes popped up. There were themes that I could feel and they experienced, and in my dialogic responding, these themes were crystallized. And then I knew, this is what in this dialogic, like methodology happened, that as a researcher I was more able to tap into these themes because I embodied them. Yeah, that final piece of my dissertation performance was something I did not plan. That was really something in that process came about, and I have to say I stayed with my participants until that final performance for a year, a quite intensive year. So when I asked them if they could consider that performance, I was almost thinking, oh my God, they probably don't want to have anything to do with this research anymore. And they felt so excited about it. So I was like, I must be onto something here if they feel so excited about it. So somehow this being so included in the research as really a researcher themselves, and having that full view almost on their experience through my research, gave them that sense, yes, I want to do that. Because I feel included. It's not somebody looking from outside over me, okay, what are they doing? But they felt like they were participating in something that really fully included them. I really want to thank my advisor, Dr. Matt Henley, because I feel, and this was after my defense, he stood right next to me, and whoever was there in my little celebration, it's a nice group of people. And I just said, without him, there's no way I would be where I am. And it really becomes this relationship of trust with your advisor that is extremely crucial. So yes, I had to convince him. It's not like he was convinced from the beginning, and I wasn't, because how would I know how something ended up that nobody really did it in that form before me? And that's another thing that I can maybe talk about a little bit later. But it is this feeling of, there has to be a feeling of courage. Maybe it has to do with a certain level of maturity within myself, that I know I have this experience. And I also said to myself, once I'm in my doctoral studies, I will do really, now my learning is really about what is really deeply connected to myself in that way. So I feel research is always like a me search, and I had the guts and the courage to do that. And but it was tough at times. And it was actually definitely tough at times because I thought sometimes, either this is good or this is completely stupid what I'm doing here. I have to be honest, that was really at times came to my mind to think, yeah, but how do I know if this works, if that comes together? So multimodal research, if you're considered doing this in your research, or using, all kinds of modalities, I think first the question should be why. I think it's important to, yes, maybe it's out there, we see it in this exhibition, there are different possibilities, but I think it's not so much about that maybe there are more possibilities out there, maybe there are more accepted possibilities at universities, but I think it's really important, why do I feel my data has to be in that way or has to be reported in that way? Because otherwise it shouldn't become something of like, oh, I can do all these different things, I can use more technology for the sake of technology. I think it needs to be what makes my multimodality, what makes it different than my research if I use this, and why do I believe this difference is very crucial for my research. So I think each doctoral student should ask that question, and if they feel convinced that it needs that, then go for it, definitely. Yeah, if they can really answer for themselves that clearly. The way I structured it and having this dialogue between the modalities, I would say, is something that I haven't really seen done in that way, but definitely there are some dance educators, not so many, who have done like certain research in that way. And one that was really inspiring me was Eva Antila. She wrote like her dissertation in this autoethnographic way to really have always her, almost like having a dialogue throughout that research with herself and giving like always like these feedback loops to herself, what she's doing. She had some thoughts that she put out there. So it was, I would say, this inner dialogue that happened, and I really like that. So like a narrative writing where she's constantly, feedbacking to herself. And she, and it makes sense for her because she worked with, she's a very strong expert in dialogic pedagogy in dance education, and that made so much sense that she would write her dissertation in that way. But it was still textual, but still there was this dialogue going on, and I love that non-traditional writing that also inspired me. Actually, I remember also talking to my advisor, I said, I want to do this non-traditional writing here. I don't like this here. Methodology and all these sections, these chapters, and he was saying to me, no, you got to stick to those chapters, because Eva Antila is actually, she teaches in Helsinki at the university there, and I think it's maybe more embraced that she was totally allowed to write. It's almost like a little novel, the way. But so I said, okay, I'll keep those chapters the way they're supposed to be, but I will still have my dialogic way. So the writing style kind of was inspired by her. And then there is also these somatic dance narratives, which I would respond to my dancers, participants, in my research. They were inspired by this interpretive phenomenological analysis approach, and movement therapist Tomoyo Kawano, she really, with her research, because she did like interviews of her participants, and then the text that she would receive, she would actually move to the text. It was almost like understanding the words through her body. And I said, wow, this is great. So that was her interpretation, understanding through her body a little deeper more what that interview was about. So I said, yeah, that makes sense. So this, again, meeting different authors, then it started to take shape. My research took shape and all these components. And another researcher is Akinleye Adesola. I'm sorry, Adesola Akinleye, sorry, first and last name. And she worked very, she's a scholar and artist, and she worked very cross-disciplinary. And she worked, for example, with architects and with buildings and would help people who are non-movers, but to give embodied expression to spaces. And I just love that, working with space, and it also kind of encompasses my dialogic space. So I would say, if you ask me, these three scholars, Eva Antila, Adesola Akinleye, and Tomoe Kawano, I really liked. And also they have especially Akinleye and Kawano, they have this less Western, they had their research in a less Western context. And because a lot of influence from my dialogic approach comes from an Eastern context and a Buddhist context, where dialogue is very, it's like a certain also spiritual aspect to it. And I felt like I could more relate to the way they used these interactions. Yeah, how do you cite multi-modal work, or how do you cite a video, I mean, if I would really think about it let's say, in the context of my research, I think videos have to be seen in a context. Is it important who created them, or is it more important in what context they were created? So who has the ownership over that? I think the person that created the context is, I would say, more the ownership than the one who maybe created the final video. But that would be my understanding. So if let's say in my research, if somebody would want to cite my videos, let's go for the videos. Since you don't have that in the table, in the beginning of your dissertation, you only have images or graphs. I actually think maybe should be included in the beginning. So maybe we should add that. Maybe that should be, because then it would be great if you have numbers. So you have my research, you have my name, you have the year, so Spain 2024, and maybe you have video 33. There you go. I think that would make it easy, to put it in that context of that research. So this is I would like. So maybe we need to have, maybe think about how we can include those multimodal, if it's videos or even music tracks or something, how we can include them maybe in the table. And then people can have the numbers and then eventually cite it that way. I think it would need, if I'm thinking somebody cites my video, then they would refer, obviously if they cite it, they would refer to that video. And even if they would, maybe since I have voiceover of my participants, maybe they would have voiceover, which also you could find in the monologues, because the voiceover tracks are part of, where the monologues, the words of the monologues. I think, again, it's probably more about why do you feel you need to cite something like in a video? And if you feel like you need to cite it in the video, which you cannot cite in the text, then I think that should be then separated. Because if I find something in the text, then I don't have to use the video. So, but then I think it should be separate. Yeah, it could be then maybe both citations, the video and the text. Yeah. I had this postdoctoral performance in February, and this is actually really beautiful how this is kind of continuing this methodology. One of my participants created her own piece, because I had actually at that stage I said, okay, if somebody would like to use my methodology for their own dance making, because it actually is very creative in that way that you could find all kinds of themes and then interview your dancers, and then they, in that embodied way, they find their own, through their own perspectives, find their entryway into a work. And one of my participants did that. And so what we did in the beginning, I was, because we did, our work, the postdoctoral performance, and hers first. And I just said that both pieces are based on the same methodology, and this methodology I created through my dissertation. So I think it would be something like that. I would just say that is the methodology that I've, kind of invented, created in this embodied way, and then I'm fine with it. So as long as people, would, and then they can just take the work wherever they want to take it. So what do I work on right now? As I said, I decided to continue my dissertation for the next 3 years. So we'll have a 5-year project, and then we'll see. Maybe I'll come back here, talk about it. I really want to see what happens in this longer period to dance, former dance students, what embodiment means for their future, even if they don't continue in a professional dance, career. And I also, my focus is, I'm very involved with the transformative learning community. So I'm always interested in transforming how these years that I kind of followed them, how maybe even through giving that space to them reflecting on what the dance education meant in their life, how that maybe has also transformative aspects to their life, which some of them had mentioned, and it's also my dissertation. So just reflecting on it had given them a different perspective on their future. And so this transformative learning is very important for me, and the lifelong learning. So I work now in besides doing several dance and movement classes I teach, I have also taught, not currently, the writing of monologues. So I'm also into textual work and literature, which I have done. It has come to a certain end at this point. So I'm working always with this idea of text and movement, and I want to create more community projects based on text and movement, where participants can be interviewed before they understanding, more deeply a certain subject. The last community project I did was about body and age, and I work with these different age groups. Myself, not being young, not being old, but of course, you as a dancer, you see also how age has an impact on your body and on your ability to move and dance, and it changes. But I'm talking about working with the oldest participant was 84. And I feel that my work with older people, I'm sorry, it was 84, but the youngest was 14. So we had a big age difference. And I really like to explore more this different age populations in community work, and giving space that all bodies, different, doesn't matter what age level they are in, that each body is completely invited into the space. So we don't go into, I can't do this because I'm now 80. And I always say in the beginning, each one of us, we have our limitations, each one of us have our beautiful, possibilities, and not to compare what we can do then, what we can't do then. So, and it's very exciting, and I want to just share that the younger participant in this community project, this is really in the neighborhood where I live in Berlin, they were so excited to work with people older. And I feel that in an embodied way, it doesn't happen often. It happens that each age level stays, each population stays in, on their own. but it doesn't often happen that they actually interact. So this really came about in my dissertation too, in one of my courses actually, and I also had a talk with my advisor before, Dr. Henley, and we were just talking about that actually the older population, more and more, we have more and more people who get older, we have less people who are actually younger. So it shifts now. So we have to really find ways to include this older generation, I think, back into life almost. They're not separated, but I think we have to be very creative about it, because it's just, that is the phenomenon that we're dealing with, that we have more and more people getting older. I think to use multimodality it's a great stepping into your research. I think there is, obviously there are many ways you can do it, but I think you have like all these different tools available. How to use them then and how to analyze all your data is, of course, that's a big journey. But I would encourage anyone to really see the richness that multimodality can bring to research and try it out. Maybe only once, but then you can say, okay, now I'd rather stay with text, or that is more, I feel more familiar with that, or some graphs, or which is fine, it's all good. I think it's just maybe a good way to try it and to see if maybe something else will come through, another perspective or richer experience in research. Yeah.